All right. So today I'm talking with Dave Stutzman. He was recently on Paul Vanderklay's channel with Cassidy talking about the Breakwater Festival that's coming up. And he also was just at the Midwest Estuary. So maybe you can fill me in a little bit
Yeah.
about all the stuff I missed. I've been, eyeing everybody's social medias jealously, wishing I was there. But so, Dave, tell me a little bit about yourself and what you where you're from and what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, good to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to talk online. It's always fun.
Yeah.
And also to talk about my recent experience, even at the Midwest area, because it's I think I'm still unpacking it up here. So that's it's always a good opportunity. Yeah, my name's Dave. I live in Germany. I've lived there for a number of years now. My wife is German. We have 3 kids, so they're German American, and we feel very much at home there. I live in the city of Mannheim, which is a fairly large city, actually, but not very well known outside of Germany, I would say. It's an industrial city, and it's kind of the train station for Heidelberg. Heidelberg is a well-known city outside of Germany. So everybody Heidelberg comes through Mannheim. And I work in church work there. And I've done that for most of my time living in Germany. And then I'm heavily involved in Estuary, something that kind of I got involved through because of friendships that I had that were paying more attention to the online discourse going on about these things. And so I got to get involved in that. And then because of those relationships, got to start getting involved in Breakwater. And Breakwater would be maybe that kind of level up from Estuary, which is like we're trying to gather people across a bigger swath of territory, you could say. And Breakwater's now organized 4 festivals. And in this year, we even did our first German-speaking one. We've always done it internationally because there's so many different people that come from different corners of Europe. And this time we did kind of a smaller gathering. I think we're about 30, 40 of us that were just Germans speaking. There were non-Germans there as well, but yeah.
Very cool. So, so I'd like to know a little bit more too about, what you do church-wise there.
Okay.
So I had gone to an Assemblies of God discipleship program, which was kind of, and then later a Bible college too, where I, first got some of my ministry training. And they always, part of their thing was always to have people go on a short-term missions trip.
Yeah.
So that you get the experience of being in another place. But, of the ones that they would offer, it was very different going to Europe versus like going to Africa or South America or Asia and things like that. And, just because the culture is so different. And, now remembering all that from, back then and I knew a few Europeans who'd come over too and, kind of shared their experience. But it seems like Estuary is kind of like such a perfect solution in a lot of ways for kind of, I mean, it's to say, no, it's not to be doing Estuary well. You'd never want to be like sneaky, trying to like make it be evangelism. It is what it is. But it's definitely a place where you could foster the relationships where maybe people are more comfortable talking about those other things. So.
Yeah.
So what do you do other than Estuary, and then how does Estuary fit into that?
That's a great question. Well, I'm fascinated about this question of just how Estuary relates to the church in general, and I think that question goes 2 ways, right? It's one is what is Estuary in itself, and how is that kind of pulling in people from outside the church context, and then why should Christians or the church be involved in the Estuary in its own, because it is something different than the church, and I think that is something very important to distinguish. But we'll circle back to that. Yeah, I'm my background is Mennonite. So
Okay.
I grew up in a missionary family. I grew up in Germany, and I grew up in Australia. And so I was 12 when we moved back to the States. I called Virginia my home. That's where I'm right now. I'm at my parents' house. And so in some ways I was very fortunate to have a real different experiences in different places about what the church is, and often in kind of more smaller kind of emergent type kind of situations where it wasn't like an established context of church. And often what that means is you're really digging into the issues of like, where is the church and how it relates to the world around to it, or the context around itself. And I think all of that led eventually to me also feeling really pulled to like study that. And I ended up doing a master's in missiology, intercultural studies. I studied in California, and that was became also more apparent to me, this idea of this we're refiguring out our relationship to our own context in the church, because we had such a given of what the church was in the West. So when I say the Western context, we're finding footing again. We're trying to figure that out, as well as the culture around us is trying to figure out what the church is supposed to represent. So I think all of that is just a kind of maybe more abstract way of saying it. It's so interesting to be how I've ended up in Estuary, because that seems to be a manifestation of that conversation that our culture is trying to figure out. Yeah.
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 And, one of the things I noticed is like just thinking about, obviously the history of, I don't know, like just the last 100 years or 100 years plus or whatever, because there's this thing of people feel isolated from their traditions or whatever in the history and all that. And I think that, it's pretty, to me, it makes sense that like, when you think about like World War I, World War II, that there was generations of people that are growing up and they had that religion as a cultural background and a tradition. But I can't imagine that there was much opportunity for people to really wrestle with the questions of what it means, because there was much more pressing things going on just of life. And so then maybe, when you get to like baby boomers, and like my parents' generation and stuff, it was like, why do we do this? It's because it's what we do. And that's like all the answer there was that. It's like, then there was the time to really discuss and unpack these things, because you have a moment of peace. But so much of the like meaning behind it had kind of just, been lost. And so, and obviously there's a lot of people that are kind of rediscovering all different aspects of various faith traditions, whether they have a personal connection to it or not. But, it seems to me like that in Estuary and all the kind of YouTube stuff and all the thing is like, people want, like, there's this thing where if you go to church, it's like you can't, there's a lot of questions you might not be able to ask, or you never know if you're gonna ask a question and it's like some kind of a landmine of like that's inappropriate, and so I think that seems to be like a lot of what's going on, where it's just, I don't know, having the freedom to not have to worry about like, am I a heretic if I ask the wrong question, or am I going to get in trouble, or whatever.
Yeah. Yep. I think I don't know if you've ever. Well, I think Paul talks about it a decent amount, which is that kind of sincerity culture versus authenticity culture.
Yeah.
And I find that a very helpful framing. I learned about it through another book that talks a lot about that authenticity that Taylor Charles Taylor talks about in his tomes that I have never read. I've only ever read commentary on his stuff, but he gives a lot of really, I think, helpful analysis and words to the kind of the secular experience of the world. And in some ways, when you get rid of all the externals as markers for your identity, then that journey starts drifting starts going inward, that subjective, that the truth lies within type of thing. And that has gone on only in the last couple of generations to a degree. I mean, decades, maybe through the last couple of generations, where that worldview, I wonder if there wouldn't have been a premium laid on questioning your belief system in the same way that we do today, right? Because it's almost a rite of passage right now. You should go through that process of figuring it out for yourself in a way. I just was talking to a friend of mine who grew up here in this area. He grew up Mennonite, and Mennonite is like any denomination, has that kind of, here's how to, here's the tradition, here's the expectation, all that kind of stuff. But to some degrees, even more intense than others, because we have this cultural element that has always kind of the apartness from the broader culture. You can see that in its most kind of visible, like the Amish in the old order Mennonite. We dress differently, that type of thing. And there's a whole spectrum all along those lines. But that is something you do inherit, that like, oh, we're this other tradition in a sense. Anyway, so I was talking to him about that, and it was interesting to hear him because he has very much moved on in life, and church and faith and much of what he grew up with is no part of his life anymore. And he sees that as kind of, that's the process you go through to becoming truly who you are, right? And it was just, we could talk really open and honestly about it. And then I kind of, well, then what does that mean to you, that background you have? And that's, you could tell that he was kind of wistful, but didn't know how to go back, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's sometimes a good way, like, we don't know how to go back kind of moment, like that everybody feels like we don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wonder, because this kind of is, hitting on some of the area where I've been approaching this, and where more of my curiosity lies, because like I was raised by, my dad was a pastor, not always, but he became a bivocational pastor when I was a kid. But both of my parents were like born again, kind of in that 70s Jesus kind of era when a lot of that was going on, and they were really great, they're really faithful, and they did all the right things. And so I never really, I had my my wrestling like within different aspects of Christianity, but I never walked away. But once I like kind of discovered just some of what I would say one of the things that stuck out for me, like with Jordan Peterson, was it was around the COVID time, and like. Man, just like every Christian voice was like so doom and gloom, and it was like for different reasons. Like like in Pentecostal churches, it was like, this is all it's all the end times, and then you could go to another any kind of conservative voice. They were just so like their messages were so rooted in fear, and it was just like exhausting. And then Jordan Peterson was like, had something kind of positive to say, and like, hey, this is like a lot, more, interesting. And then that led me to PBK, who I love, and he's very much of that positive spirit. But like, I think that this is something where it's like there, especially in this is probably a very different context from Europe, but like in America, there are still so many like pockets of like faithful Christian community that are really just kind of, I think they're living in a bubble. They're kind of oblivious to like what's coming, or to how bad it is in some of these, maybe the more urban, settings or things like that, or, what's going on with like a lot of the despair that particularly like young men are feeling,
Yeah.
and and so I'm kind of thinking like, okay, how do I get the people in my church to like, open up their eyes to this? Because like, I mean, right now, and I live in Texas now. I grew up in New England, which was much more like, it's like it's like living 10 years in the future, in comparison. And, so it's like our church, it's like, we do the same things. We kind of do the evangelism programs and we say the same things. And it's, we have a good time on Sunday. And it's like, we are consistently getting like the group of people that like church and think church is fun.
Yeah.
And it's like, part of their culture, and they're not bad people. They're all really good people, but it's like, we're just, because we do have some people coming in, we're oblivious to the people that we're not like connecting with at all, that might live in our community. So I guess that's to say, like, what do you think? Like, I don't know, how do you make a church or a Christian community where things are still more or less going right? How do we bring that awareness of what's going on in the wider world?
Well, I think you're right on in your analysis there. I always find it helpful to try to figure out some of the nuances, difference between Europe and America, the States. Although I think we live at different, maybe you could say different stages of like a post-Christian like relationship or a post-Christian reality into our culture. Much of it feels further down the line in Europe. You could maybe say another way to say it is that the secularization of the culture is just more thorough in many European parts of Europe. One of the big differences in the kind of cultural conversation around church is that in the US, you do really have a robust Christian like presence still in some parts of the country, just very, very much part of the context, and maybe much more. I think it's going through the same dynamics and the same challenges, but it's just different in its visibility and how it's felt. But I think more and more, most denominations, at least that have a longer, like kind of that aren't the new, that they're coming from like an older denomination, are feeling that things are changing. They're sliding in a way, and so there's concern there. There's some despair, I would say, even too. But the reality is that that is much more intact. And it's a real identity that people are drawn to. In the Europe, like I can speak mostly from Germany because I do think there's a lot of differences between the different European countries. You do have a pretty vibrant kind of what they call free church expression of church, but it's very, very, very small. Like maybe it's less than maybe 5% of what would people that would be part of the, like, consider them part of, like, can count themselves as Christian. Because the vast majority are then what they call more the state churches, the Catholic and the Protestant. So I have to say Protestant because it's a whole network of Reform and Lutheran and different. In German they say the evangelisch, so the kind of evangelical, but it actually Protestant is a better way to say it.
So
and
maybe
those
closer to like the mainline churches in the U.S.
That would be a great way. It is pretty. It can have some regional differences, but really it's the state Protestant church, right? In a Lutheran Reform, in its essence, and there's variety in that, and you do find even that same kind of from mainline to evangelical almost within that, But what I was going to say is that is probably the most visible expression of Christianity in Germany. But you'd probably almost, I don't want to overstate it, but you would almost have a similar level of participation and activity between the free churches and the state churches, in meaning that the amount of people that are active in the free church scene almost is probably similar to the state church, because the state church tends to be predominantly like a nominal experience for many. There are very churches that are very active, but often you find most churches have just a few active people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so that kind of makes me think about this other thing, which, kind of to reframe what I was saying before, like saying like a lot of the evangelical churches aren't aware maybe about how bad things are, but I think maybe also in some ways they're not aware of like how good things are in some ways too. Like because you were talking about like your friend who's Mennonite, and that there's that kind of separatist element of it, and and this is something that's been discussed, I think, but it's like if you form your identity in opposition to something else, well, then you're never going to really be able to reconcile with with that. So if it's always like the church versus the world, that's creating a barrier that is difficult to cross. But and this is probably something that I have definitely, my eyes have been more open to, and I knew some of it. I knew some of it, like on a historical sense. But seeing like kind of the Tom Holland thesis of like, so much of like what we just call West or is even part of the secular West is really rooted in Christianity. Yeah. It's just a kind of Christianity that's lost the the name or to say like the teachings, the practices have pervaded, even if we've lost sight of where they came from.
Yeah.
And so that's a tough thing, like, and so I'm wondering like maybe if Estuary helps with, in that case, maybe I think that definitely would probably be good for people in the church to have some of the people outside who are like, well this, I don't need church because what like because I've even had family that said like every time they go to church they just feel like the pastor's just talking about how horrible you are and you're such a sinner, and it's like, and they're just like, I don't understand that, like it doesn't resonate with me at all. And knowing these people, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense that doesn't resonate with you, because you're actually a very responsible person. You care for others. You have a lot of things that are admirable. It's just you don't realize that. So it's weird. It's like the people outside the church don't realize where they're getting their values from, and then the people in the church don't recognize how successful we've actually been in sharing those things. So I mean, like, what are the kind of I don't know, maybe like what are the light bulb moments you think people are having in your experience with Estuary and maybe on both sides?
Well, I maybe just to frame a little bit what I think how Estuary fits in, or the experience that I've been part of. I in some ways, to go back to Tom Holland, I do like how he frames things. I think it's very helpful in some ways to frame the secular project as an extension almost of, well, the Christian project, but maybe more specifically even the Protestant one, right? Like that there's something about this continual kind of reformation of the culture, right? And it's what it has done is kind of really keep some parts but throw out other parts, but the whole thing is still encapsulated by a certain vision about where history is going, what is valuable, and all that, and in some ways has a whole kind of new way of expressing that in moral language. And I think that's what we're going through, is in our context, people are trying to search for moral language that are Yep. That's what happens when you got kids. So hopefully that doesn't happen to me.
All right.
No worries, man.
Yeah.
So all I was going to say is that I do think that that secular world is shaped by a Christian vision to a degree, and the both the secular world and the Christian world we don't know how to relate to each other because in a way.
Yeah.
And I do think one of the things that I have found as a pattern in our estuary is the people that are coming and then the people that are becoming Christian are less about them. They're more about the secular world coming to grip with the promises of secularism and saying, is this really what I believe? Is it sufficient? Is there more? Those degrees of questions. And so a kind of a typical, maybe more extreme pattern would be people finding the bottom of there isn't much to life, and there's a nihilism there, there's an emptiness there, there's got to be more kind of idea, and then not finding those handholds to climb back out of that in the kind of a secular worldview. And they start looking for other things, and they start looking for things like religion. And what religion tends to offer them is it asks more of them, right? It says you have to participate in this. And so that suddenly pulls them back out in a way. So I know several that would fit their journey in life, that they found some kind of bottom, some kind of nihilistic, like there's no meaning in the world, but that can't be right? Like there's just something incongruent about that. So where do I look? And that becomes often an online journey at the beginning. And then at some point they are drawn to estuary. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. So cause I think in my kind of preferences, it's like, theologically and probably culturally, I would probably lean more liberal, but it's like, I really only am interested in attending more conservative churches, because it's like, well, it's like, at least I know you guys really love Jesus, even if it's like, maybe, you could use a little bit more nuance in some of these views or whatever, so like, that's the place where, I find myself in. But it's interesting because it's like, it seems like it's a similar thing with that kind of like or I'd say churches like that really understand that thing of hitting like rock bottom when it comes to maybe like the more outward crisis of life. Somebody has a divorce, somebody, drugs or alcohol, or, loses a job, some sort of real crisis that's, maybe like hits them in a physical way, and economically they have like a good path for reaching those people and taking forward. But with the meaning crisis thing, it's kind of like, it's people that didn't have any of those issues. They had success in all those areas, and they're finding a different kind of like rock bottom. And so, so I don't know, maybe it's like some.
Well, there is that other rock bottom part too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say that's present as well. And maybe I could have mentioned that, but I do think sometimes they're tied together. Like you start getting nihilistic when you're hitting rock bottom, like in your marriage or like that kind of stuff too. I mean, I think what I was going to say, there is something about the U.S. context that has a more robust church presence, like, or life, church life, maybe is a good way to say it. And so I like how you said it, they're kind of like not aware of like that, in the sense of maybe what is down the road to that. But at the same time, they're also more successful at it. And so there's a kind of insulation that goes on to the dynamics around them when it comes to this like post-Christian, I would say, like kind of the march of secularism in some ways. And I also think that there is an insulation to that within kind of liberal Christianity, where they do, like, they believe in the promises that that's the future somehow, and kind of they're more prone to hitch their wagon to that as the way to, they kind of join in that, like, yeah, secularism is the best way to get over the kind of the superstitions and the backwardness and the things that we need to jettison from our tradition. And so there is a process that's going on as well in the liberal Christianity. And what I find in both when I'm talking to either side, it's like I have to kind of explain this post-Christian reality, like that is there and it is happening, and there's a little bit of a both sides don't know how to kind of really account what's happening. I don't know. Yeah,
that's interesting. And I think the thing that I've been noticing or trying to kind of figure out is that that top and that bottom, they're also are kind of like separating, and so like there's more people in the middle that like they don't like, even as I think about like if I were to go to a new church or something, it's like I would get more attention if I said like, oh, I used to be a drug addict or something, like it's like or maybe they would it's like, oh, I could be useful because I have some skills as a volunteer, but like there's not a lot of attention going to the middle. And my personal concern is a lot of this, and especially like with young men, I think that's kind of a lot of what sprung out of Peterson. And part of this is like I have 3 young daughters, and I'm concerned about like who are the men that are going to be dating and marrying them someday. How do you and I think that's a big this is kind of like I know it's not completely, but it is probably a male dominant space like online and especially and how do you think that translates, or like what is that because I feel like I'm mostly experiencing the American context, but like what is the feeling of like I don't know, like there's not a lot of hope for the future, I would say, especially more so among young men here in the United States. And what's it like over there in Europe, do you think?
That's a good question. Yeah, you probably have a good sense. I mean, just why don't you give me a little bit, like, how do you like to describe that in the US? I want to see if that would kind of correlate to how I experience it.
Well, I mean, I think it's just like, there's just like a lot of, essentially it's like if you think about the kind of like normal happy life that most people would want, to have a good job, to be married, to have kids, to maybe, to own a home. I know that's less common in Europe than it is here, but either way, it's like that kind of thing has become just such a like hugely difficult thing for a lot of people to achieve, and it's in different ways, so like even for the people maybe who are making good money, they can do that, but then it's like there's a big political divide between like young men and young women, so like getting the marriage aspect is really hard even if you're making the money. For other people, it's it might be finding the career, it's like a lot of oversaturation in college degrees, not enough like path forward, and essentially I think it's just that it's such an uphill battle, and without, I mean, and this is even something like I'm struggling with, it's like I'm 40 years old and I've reached a pretty good level of success, like comparable to like where my father, with everything that he taught me, but it's like I don't have, I am looking for more like mentorship from more direction for like what to do next. It's like I can help I'm pretty good now, figured out how to get like teenagers to get them a little more directed towards making some good decisions, but it's like, well, but I can only bring them up to my level of success, and I'm just kind of figuring everything out on my own here. And so there's definitely like a big problem, I think, with that, like with obviously the community thing, which is why people are going to church, which is good. But I think, it's like, I don't know if there's enough like mentors and leaders to go around, or, our discipleship is not thick enough, I guess you could say.
Well, I can answer. I think I can only. I mean, I can only answer in some observations I've met, because how do you know if this is true what I'm going to say? But I would say one difference that jumps out to me is that the political polarization is not as intense in Germany as it is here. Right? So that makes a big difference. And here, like you just said, it does seem to have even now some kind of a gender a gap almost in some of those things that have going on when it comes to the younger generation. It is harder to say in Germany. Now, is there a growing kind of tenseness and kind of intensity of the political context? Yes, there's that happening. We're intending to move back to the US next year, or I'll be moving back. My wife will be coming along, and we will be moving to America. And the first, it doesn't kind of matter what side you're on. They say, why are you moving back to the US? Like, why are you coming now? Like, don't you know what's going on here? That kind of alarmist about the polarization. I would say that comes from the polarization. Yeah. My response is, yeah, but it's also going on in Germany. It's just not as intense overall. There's also a kind of a bifurcation along very similar lines, or kind of narratives. I wouldn't say political lines, but like similar kinds of divides going on in the society. It's a little bit more like the social democrats, Greens versus the like ultra right, like a little bit more, but there's many parties, so it's not quite the same.
Yeah.
A versus B type of team A, team B type of thing, which I think lends itself to a little bit more that clarity seeking that both sides likes to have in which tribe are you in type of thing. Right. What's clear in Germany is kind of an east-west divide, which is also growing, and that dissatisfaction that especially former East Germany has towards the Western Germany. And you find the MAGA movement equivalent in East Germany is much stronger than it. And I would say not make Germany great again, but just kind of this idea that it's, Germany is for Germany type of movement. Yeah. Anyway, so what I want to say, that I think takes away some of the air out of that a little bit more, because it's not quite as distinct. That I do think, though, just in my personal experience, I went to this Midwest estuary, and in my group, in my little estuary, we had a wonderful experience. The same kind of young guys were there as the same kind of young guys that show up in my estuary in Germany. So that was not a difference at all. And it was actually, I was quite that's where I was really moved, because there was that same story coming out that I was like, I know that, oh, you're just like Hannes, you're just like Matthias, I know these other guys and it was just completely different context, completely different story in their lives, but they were the same pattern in a sense. Yeah.
So, and I think probably, I'm guessing, I did get to go last year. I went to the little conference that Paul did in Connecticut, which was really cool because it was such a small group, and there's a lot of different.
Barn? Was that in the barn?
Yeah. So I'm in that little picture that he had on his.
I just saw it today.
It's interesting because it's like so much of I think the polarization kind of stuff comes through the whole online aspect of things, because it's like, well, online you're either like a Republican or a Democrat, you're for this or you're against that, and once you get into a room with people, it's like the similarities become way more apparent than, I don't think there was really any significant arguments. There was a lot of intense conversation and like a lot of personal stuff. I don't think there was a lot of like any arguments that you know, of the sort that typically occupy a lot of people's time online. You know, in that whole time, even though you know we were aware that different people had different conversations, and I mean maybe that's even just something of the nature of being face to face with other people. Seems like it kind of works to strengthen the similarities more than the differences. I wonder if maybe because I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't know how it is in your city, but I know typically I've been to Europe a little bit. I
Yeah.
didn't make it into Germany, but you know, it is much more. Well, it's kind of like clumped together. You know, a little bit more. It's not like here in the U.S. You know, where it's like the spread outness of the U.S. seems like it's really easy to resort to kind of the Netflix box or whatever, you know, to stay online and stay at home. And is it still, do you think, like more social over where you are? Is that still, or is it difficult to get people to come out and, you know, meet?
You mean to do like an estuary?
Yeah.
No, I think we have in some ways way more challenges than here. That was maybe came out in the conversation we had with Paul, and to do that particular thing, right?
Yeah.
Because it's you have a general disinterest in church because it's so secular. And I just talked to a Dutch guy last week. And he used the word like unintelligible. Like I think that's even almost like it's incoherent. There's like what is religion? Like it's just so far from most people's experiences that it's not an immediate thing that people are looking for. Like, oh, I have a problem in my life. Maybe I should go find a church. No, those people somehow found maybe like Peterson and that are coming to the estuary, and that, you know, that's like, so there, the broader thing is that Germany still speaks German and doesn't have a German Peterson, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the so there are some that find Peterson or find some kind of this other dialogue going on online, but it usually takes place in the English speaking space, right? And I think as far as specifically to the estuary, the other part is I do think there is a common experience of people are trying to figure out what community is and how to build community. And I always say, as somebody that works more in like kind of church planning and community building as a church thing, I find a lot of people in the same space as me when I'm talking to people like running a beekeeping club or a soccer for local kids in the neighborhood, to, you know, a library. Like how are they supposed to? Because there's just this general diffusion somehow of going on that people just don't participate in community like they used to, right? It's going on in Germany just like anywhere else in the US. I mean, that's very similar. And so again, maybe that I would say that accounts a little bit for the like then people start looking at the political sphere to like find, you know, like to find meaning in their life. That's probably going on in Europe too, right? In Germany, in the same kind of way, just not the same intensity. Yeah.
So it's kind of just the attraction of the ease of digital life online is just, it's just, that's kind of, I guess that's just universal.
Is it malaise? I don't know. How would you describe what it does to community? What is online do to our experience of community in our real life? Like,
yeah, I don't know. I mean, you know, I feel like, you know, I definitely, I guess the whole experience of me exploring this area again, you know, people, every time I just am like, oh, wow, I didn't realize how lucky I was that I've, had, you know, with all the things that I've had, the church communities that I've been a part of, and the family background that I had, and a lot of that stuff. It is kind of like the cool thing for me is more in some of like the thinky talky stuff, because it's like nobody in my men's Bible study wants to talk about any of this stuff. Or maybe occasionally it's like I can bring some little useful nugget or something I pick up from YouTube world, and it'll land. But like, it's still like it is like being, I don't know, 10 years in the past or something. It seems like, when you step into a lot of churches here,
Yeah.
it's the Christianese,
Yes.
language is
Yes.
being spoken and stuff. So, so personally, it's like, yeah, I'm really, really fortunate, but it is tough because it's like, at the same time, I don't, I don't have a lot of the like, like I said, I'm lacking the connections in that kind of going to the next level. Because I had like I had a ministry calling, and my wife and I both did that full time for a long time. Now she's stepping down from it. Here we're gonna have our fourth child. It's around Thanksgiving time, and so yeah, so that's kind of that was the deal. Like as far as working, no more youth group on Wednesday nights and all that stuff. So trying to like find the path forward for us that's kind of like a hard thing, and I'm kind of trying to do some of this, online stuff. It's a little bit of like, oh, you get a little bit of notoriety, or you get to meet somebody, trying to, but I'm trying to do it all for the sake of building something in the real world.
Yeah.
But it's hard. It's hard to figure out, but it's so much easier to just do things online. And it is bringing it into the real world that makes it
bringing it. Yeah. Well, I was gonna what was I gonna say about that? I think what I noticed in being at the Midwestuary, and then actually one of my favorite, actually one of my highlights really was the Sunday, which wasn't an official Midwestuary event, but I went to the church where Paul preached, and reinforced. That's the first sermon I heard from him in person, and just reinforced everything about what I admire him as somebody who communicates about living as Christians in our world. And like, kind of, it was really, really touching to me. And what was neat then about that was just being in that church and taking part in worship there. And then afterwards, they had like a town hall style meeting. We had coffee break, and then the pastor of that church interviewed Paul. So it's a CRC church. So Paul's familiar. I mean, it was his denomination. So they could kind of have a little bit insider baseball talk as well, and talking about Estuary and its kind of relationship to the church. And the growing question within me was this idea of like, yeah, you do have to, like, it is when there are intact, healthy, vibrant church communities, the need to do Estuary isn't apparent to them, right? They have community. They have, so why should the church be doing Estuary, which is an intention, I would say an intentional movement of going out, right? It's not trying to replicate church space somewhere. It's saying we're leaving our church space and we're going to go participate fully as Christians in that other space. But it is a sentness to it that I think is part of that, what Christian needs to understand about taking part in Estuary, right? But there is this kind of reconfiguration, what you need to, when you're talking to Christians in that space. It's like, no, you don't need to take a message out, right? You don't need to be worried about content in how it relates to, and don't worry about participating and spending energy in another community that isn't church, right? Which is also, I think, like, why would I, if I have community here, why would I invest outside? It's like, it's trying to come up with a new sense of like, but that part of the purpose is being in the world and learning how to be present, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't do that very well, actually, often, in the sense that Christian community is, I would say, I mean, has all its ups and downs, flaws and everything, but it can be a really wonderful thing. It does something very well, like Peugeot says, there's something about the right proper place of that in our lives. Then if it can play a really important role. And we don't know how to participate often in community outside of our churches. And I think Estuary affords that because it does allow people to be Christian in that space, but they have to understand that that is not a Christian space. And that's kind of that bridge between secularism, that like the secular world, I mean, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's that,
Well, I mean, I think probably this is ultimately just as important, but I wonder if it's maybe like an important step like in between. But obviously, you know, like this online space that, you know, everybody involved with Estuary and stuff is very ecumenical.
Yes.
And like I wonder if how I'm guessing it's probably a little easier in Europe. I don't know. Like, just I'm thinking about my own. So it's interesting. So now I'm in Texas. It's like where there is more vibrant churches. The churches are much more tribal. When I was in New England, it was much more of like a post-Christian environment. And so if you had like a faithful church, it was like, hey, we'll work with anybody else who's interested, you know, because we want to do something in the town or whatever. You know, you can't do it with your little 20-person church, but if you get 3 churches with 20, 50 people, then you can do something together. Is that the case in Europe?
That's really good. That's a really good comparison. I think when you're a minority, right, and you have that as your experience in the broader culture, then that you're not as competitive with your other minority the other, like in that sense. And so I think in general there's ecumenicism is a more natural state between churches. Not always, of course not always. And I think then the irony there is I think the interesting twist to it is there's a certain draw to ecumenicism as a kind of Christian version of like diversity, like that that it's like almost like it's its own goal in and of itself that you find kind of more along the mainline kind of expressions of the church, because, and the difference there is, well, for good reason. I mean, there was wars fought, and like it's a much more like all of those things go way deeper, and so there is a genuine like officialness to the ecumenicism that probably also really gets lauded and people are drawn to. I find on the local level that often churches just in general are willing to work with each other a lot more just because of the common plight everybody's in, right? Like that sense. So it kind of goes both ways. I get frustrated with that kind of ecumenicism as like the highest ideal of like what churches should be doing together, because I think we're called to more than that, right? But it's at the same time I experience there's a much more openness for friendship and relationship across ecumenical lines.
That's, you know, I've been thinking like it's interesting and I wonder too if it's like this is maybe the part of this kind of like meta modern thing, or you know, like Paul's metagelical thing, you know, because I feel like so my, you know, like I jumped on Twitter or whatever for the first time, like after Elon bought it, because it was like, oh, this is like an exciting thing that's happening. And then I was like, oh, like I can just follow like the people that I want, that I like, or that you know, thinking about like so you know, I'm pretty like reformed theologically, but I've just happened to be in these kind of like not that way churches for my whole adult life, like just as, you know, that's where the opportunities were. So like I went on Twitter, I started following like a whole bunch of like reformed people and stuff like that, and then like kind of realized like, oh, there's like very different things going. Like some of these people, I'm like, yeah, I love what this guy's saying. And it's like I do not want to be associated with that person is saying. And so when it was like when the approach to ecumenism was always on like doctrinal distinctives or something, or to say like the person that I can most work with is the person who's most closely aligned with me theologically. That doesn't always seem like you can both profess the same confession and have a very different kind of like spirit and purpose of like what you're trying to do. And so it's almost like I feel like there is a sort of a ecumenism that's maybe bubbling up or something, but it's uniting people on very different lines than just like the propositional, I guess we'd say.
Yes. No, I agree.
Yeah, because it's like I feel like, well, like I don't know, like I'd rather hang out with these Mormons because it seems like they want to do like they're like they don't bum me out like you are, even though you're my theological brother or whatever. So I mean, I don't know. Just to say, like, I wonder what that, it's to me that's kind of exciting to see it, but that almost necessitates like an estuary like environment because then it's not ecumenism, because you can say like you can't hold a specifically like Christian community together if if the diversity of belief or whatever is too vast, but you can find more common ground in the way that people want to live their life, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is really interesting, this ecumenicism talk, because I think that would be not a word I would want to project over the Midwestuary, but you could say that was an expression of ecumenicism almost in our age, right? Like I don't want to, because I don't think that was what it was about. It was not like that kind of framework where like, oh, our goal is for all Christians to get along, no, actually that wasn't. There was a real common experience of trying to find meaning, right? And then understanding that finding commonality in the differences we have, right? That was the wonderfully done. And I think Vervaeke played a really important role in the whole thing, just because the conference itself was quite Christian in the sense of the participants and just some of the kind of the ethos or the spirit of the whole thing. It was, people could talk openly about Christianity, but really there wasn't dogma, right? It wasn't like this is what we have to believe. There was none of that, but just people could be themselves, I think, and I experienced that in our small group and on stage. And then what somebody like Vervaeke did is legitimize actually the Christians being able to call them, like, be Christian and not have to like defend themselves or feel threat. It just really, it was interesting because he has a way of essentially authenticating and legitimizing Christians. Because like, it's a real, and in the last section of the whole of the last thing we did on the Saturday night was one of my favorite things that day. Was they did the comment section, and they had a really good format where all the speakers were on stage, including Kale. So it was like 6 of them, I think. And no, Kale was usually moderated. He wasn't one of the speakers there, but people could put their names in a hat, and then a name would get pulled. So randos would be created, and they'd have 5 minutes on stage to ask a question, and then interact with the speakers, and then the next person's name would be called, and they'd have another question. So we did that for an hour. So there was at least a good, I don't know, maybe 15 questions that got asked, or 10 questions, I don't know. how much it was. And the thing was, it became kind of funnier and funnier because Vervaeke had more and more of a headache because so many of the questions were being directed to him, like kind of like this, like, you know, like Christians are like this. What do you think about it? Like, you know, like it was this kind of constant like question of, they wanted him to give opinions about Christianity. And he just kind of kept, and he's like, you know, like, what do you think about ecumenism? And he's like, why am I getting this question? You know, like, you know, like I'm not the, but it was that, I just want to say that that's what often is part of the estuary space, is that especially if you can have a mix of people, you somehow, that the non-Christian element can really validate and authenticate the others if they're open and appreciative of the exchange. It's just, I would say I've felt more validated in the estuary space, like that somehow my beliefs are true and meaningful to me because it gets accepted by not others than just Christians. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's like kind of maybe because it's just been like a majority position or whatever, or, you know, Christians like always want to pretend, you know, say they're being persecuted or something like that. But it's kind of like that's been like, you know, and it certainly is, I think, in some cases, that it's like Christianity's like the view opinion or whatever that like doesn't count. Like it's not its own, you know, if somebody's got anything more exotic than that, it's like, oh, we want to learn about what you know, what's unique about your worldview. But yeah, but there are people obviously who are not as familiar with it and are, you know, maybe just that's even just the thing of like, yeah, somebody from outside is going to see it from a different way, you know, like we're always treading the same ground, we're always having the same conversations with like the people, you know, if we're in some kind of a silo, and maybe that's, you know, so that might be a good thing to say, even to pitch to a church, is like you need to have some outside people come in and tell you what they're noticing about you and ask you about the things that maybe you didn't think were important that are actually, you know, really, really valuable. So yeah,
That's
well,
yeah, good. That's a good point.
Well, why don't you tell us about, you know, what's the Breakwater Festival that's coming up, and, you know, what's going to be in store for that. And
yeah. Well, we have currently an Indiegogo campaign going. So we're trying to sell pre-sale tickets. Basically, they're going to be the cheapest price that we can offer at this point. And we're also doing just a little, like, if anybody wants to donate to Breakwater, because we really would like to kind of build up a several like events for next year, and we would like to do some more direct, let's say, training with other Europeans that are trying to start estuaries. And so we'd like to have a little resources to be able to put into that. So those are the two ways to contribute to that. The unfortunate thing is that we're a little bit, we feel very much out on the limb right now, because we put this Indiegogo, and we've actually put some money into reservations for speakers and event centers and all that, because we wanted to do it a little bigger. We've always done 50 to 60, 70 people, our events, and that's actually an optimal size. I really think that's good. But we also wanted to go to a little bit bigger, where we're trying to kind of have like a yearly event where it is a festival. We can celebrate estuary. And we wanted an event where you felt like you could bring other people along. And we wanted to have, well, when you start asking speakers to fly from the US or that kind of stuff, it has a whole nother dimension to it.
Yeah.
So anyway, we put this Indiegogo together. I think the team is right now really struggling. Well, what if we don't get it? What are we going to do? So I think the last I heard is that we will do something in November, and we'll probably do the festival in the summer. Okay. So I think if you're interested in Breakwater, there's ways to support right now in the Indiegogo. But I think more importantly, just like if you want to, there's a newsletter we send out, and we'll give everybody updates on all the events. I think the latest plan we have we're not going to do the big event, but we're going to do local events. We call them exchanges, where we do one day thing. And the difference there is we do it not in English, we do it in the local languages. And so we did that in Germany this year, which was really fun. Actually, that was the first time we ever did. We had, I think, about 40 people come, and that was cool because it was the first like bigger scale kind of estuary event in German. And we're going to do one in Dutch, and we're going to do one in German, and we'll do one in English as well. But that's in England, which isn't their native language, is English. But right. it'll be those are the three ideas. And I think that's what I'm talking a little bit hesitantly because I wasn't part of the meeting yesterday, 2 days ago. So I was driving back from Chicago, but I think that's what they decided. So it's kind of a weird thing to say right now what exactly we're doing, but I know we're doing something in November, and I think we're going to do the big thing in June. The good thing about going to the Indiegogo, though, is we do kind of have a presentation there of like what we're trying to do and kind of our plans and like how we'd like to see Breakwater be, I think, a hub for to encourage estuaries in Europe, because we want to gather as we can. That has its own value and it has its own meaning, I think, in getting people together. But really, we want to see local estuaries start. So one of the cool things that going to a place like the Midwestuary and even just talking about Breakwater on stage there, what I got to do, then you have people from Romania and Norway and Hungary coming up to you and say, we'd like to start estuaries in those places. And so I'm excited. I mean, I just would be overjoyed if that was something we could help encourage, and just that, it'd be great. Cause the silos are just really very present in Europe. Germany, I pay attention to what's going on in Germany. I live maybe a half an hour from France. I have no idea what's going on in France, right? It's, unless some big scandal that Macron did or something, then that'll be on the news.
Yeah. I know. And it was a couple of years ago, or last year, whenever, I know you guys had burn power.
Yeah.
I wonder, because this whole thing, estuary and this thing, it very much. So the way that I actually found out about it was that I just was reading. I was listening to Jordan Peterson, and then I was reading some books by Francis Schaeffer, and I Googled or you put in YouTube Jordan Peterson, Francis Schaeffer, and that got me to conversation between Paul and Byrne. And I think that there's a very similar kind of thing to what Francis Schaeffer was doing with L'Abri. Have you guys reached out to anybody from L'Abri, or do you guys have no one? I mean, I know there's still a few of them around, I think, there, right? I mean,
no, I'm not familiar with that, actually. So I'll look that up.
Yeah, well, you can definitely talk to Byrne about it because he went there and he knows. But but it was very much, it was this thing, people to me, it's there was people. Then it wasn't postmodernism; it was existentialism or whatever. But people kind of come into this Christian community and just being able to have these discussions, and it wasn't the typical kind of evangelistic, trying to convert somebody, but just the thing of letting people ask their questions and figure things out, and at the same time, living with people and seeing the daily rhythms of life that really, so you have the good conversation where you can work out the differences, but then you also have that experience of being together where you can kind of figure out the similarities. So I wonder, maybe it's definitely probably talk to Byrne about it. I think he might have some connections there.
Something. Actually, we still have connection with him, and I think Cassidy just from Breakwater was just on his channel a little while ago, or
I think
maybe Matthias. I can't remember now. Yeah,
that's cool.
Well, I think one big difference also is that there isn't the German, like I said it earlier, German Jordan Peterson, or I think England has this amazing amount of people that are, I think, playing a big role in the kind of the corner or the estuary space, but aren't yet really connected to that.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're actually trying to explore too a little bit, because there's some people there we relate to, and that would be fun to also do an event in England. There are already some happening, of course, and we don't like need to have breakwater there, but I would love to see more go on in England, because it just seems like there's such a
there's a lot of people that are
yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, very
Yeah.
cool.
Very
Well,
cool.
Definitely make sure put all the links to stuff in the thing,
Yeah.
so people
I'll
can
give you
find
some
everything and sign up, and keep and you said there was a newsletter, so people can keep on
Yeah.
top of the news and
Yeah.
whatever's going on.
We're doing stuff. We're just having to do a little bit of audibling right now, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's, I mean, that's a strength to be able to do that, like, and so, but yeah, I mean, it's like you gotta be subscribed to all the people and stuff to find out the stuff.
Yeah.
You don't want to miss out. I'm even thinking of just like, having my envy of not being able to go to Chicago, and then I was thinking like, man, I wonder what's like the most minimal, like. First I thought, I'm like, I'll just, or I say like I'll have a estuary conference for like 5 people, just see if anybody wants to come camp in my backyard or something. But then I was like, no, I could probably, get my church to be on board with it, and maybe something small, 20, 30 people, I don't know, whatever, and a Friday and a Saturday, and do it cheap, get Costco pizza or whatever if you need to, and like, I don't know, it just do, because I mean the main point is the thing of being together, and it's nice to have a cool speaker that's famous on YouTube or something, but really it's what goes on in those little groups, like that's the thing and that's what people are longing for too, is like the connections of real friendship and stuff. So,
and I'm glad you said that, because I think there's value to the getting internet celebrities or whatever to talk. Probably their value is I think it makes sometimes easier they do heavy lifting for making the case for like festivals and estuaries, in the sense that people can kind of understand, that are coming new to it. Oh, there is something here. Like they can do that in a different way because they have ideas and that kind of thing. But it shouldn't be the goal. Like, it's not like just have big events is the important part. Actually, 20 to 30 people at your what you just said would be awesome.
Yeah.
And we've done that was basically what we did in the German one, and that was we had a mix of guys that were coming from Austria and Switzerland. We had Germans from our estuary, so we had Catholic guys there. We had these these anarchist guys that were like in punk bands that came, and we had then a bunch of people like maybe a Brazilian that spoke German, or and it was just, we had an awesome time. It's like estuary, because a lot of people were new to estuary, and we just lead it, and then the whole place was just buzzing, right? People talking the rest of the day, and we'd sit back down and we'd do another round, and then that was just fun. Yeah. So yeah, so I would encourage you, even if it's just that level, that's really what I think the heart of it is at. So do it, and don't feel bashful about it. Yeah.
Probably figure it out after the baby comes. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to share one story about one of my most favorite memories from Breakwater that we did. We did it. This was the one we did in the Netherlands 2 years ago, or last year. And we were talking about earlier about ecumenism.
That word's tough.
Yeah. And we met at this Dutch professor's house, and he was gracious that we could host it there, and we had all kinds of people there, and it was a good mix of Christians, agnostic, secular, atheist types even. But it just happened to be that at the end of the whole session, we were kind of doing the last rounds together, and like maybe 2/3 of the people already left for, like, it just was the last thing we were doing together. And we went around and shared what was meaningful for us for the weekend. And at the end of that, a Dutch guy, he noticed, he said, I know everybody here, and I know that we're all Christian, actually. So it was just happened to be that the only ones were there. He said, can we pray together? And everybody turned around and like, yeah. And so it was the son of the professor, and the professor, who's Dutch Reform, he said, would you like to pray? So he said, I'd pray for everybody. So the Dutch Reform guy everybody stood up, and then you had Orthodox, Catholic, Evangelical, Mainline, I'm Mennonite. It was everybody in the room. And we had just spent the whole weekend together, right? Talking. And again, it's that adjacent space. Like, we're allowed to be Christian, but that's not the main focus of what we're there doing. But that was the only moment of that weekend where we explicitly did something Christian. And I almost had tears in my eyes, because it was just a genuine moment of ecumenic. And he prayed, and then I opened my eyes at the end, and I could just see everybody doing different things at the end of the prayer, from like crossing their eyes or like holding their hands out, just everybody in their own kind of like version of that, like the Catholic crossing, or I don't know what the Orthodox did, but they did other things. And you'd see some more of the evangelicals like holding their hands up over, but and it was this moment where I was like, this was something special. And I don't know if this thing I just experienced is going on anywhere else in Europe. Right? It was that kind of goosebumps I had. I was like, and this is actual, genuine people wanting relationship. This isn't, because that wasn't the goal, right? We wanted to be friends with each other. Yeah. Like that was, so that was cool. That was just cool. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah. And I would say I'm unashamedly of my preference that, Christianity is the best way to go for people that are on the fence about religion, all that stuff, but it is cool. I remember like, when I was much younger, I was probably like 19 or whatever, and I went on this missions trip. I went to Swaziland down in Africa, and then like to meet people that are like so different in so many ways, but then to realize like we're connected in that same like love of Christ, is such a very cool thing. And I think, kind of the cool thing about what's going on with this whole movement is, even if it's not always that explicit thing, where you get to pray with somebody and that which I think is like maybe that's like the deepest level of connection, but that you find we are all on these similar journeys, and there is so much more connection than we would have definitely than we're led to believe, based on the discourses online and things like that. And so, it's just something really powerful about getting together and really great, hopefully it's something that Christians maybe that are not as familiar with this thing would hopefully will become more involved with, and maybe just realize it's like not it's okay if we're just you don't have to worry about did I share the gospel properly this week. I mean, and to me that's kind of like even to the faith to say like, because you're not worried about like, is this the only time I'm going to ever see this person again? Because the whole point of it is that you build lasting connections with people, and that you don't worry about so much about saying everything right or doing all the right things. It's trusting God really to be in charge of making those connections happen in His time, if it does or whatever. So very cool.
Very cool. Right.
Was there anything else you'd like to share?
This was fun, and I hope you take the burden with you of organizing something down there in Texas.
Yeah, I definitely need to. I know there's one of the other guys, another guy named Michael. He's an Orthodox guy. We live in the same city. We still haven't gotten together in person, so we got to figure it out. And there's a lot of people. Texas is such a big state, but
Yeah.
there's tons of corner people all over. So somewhere we'll get something going on. But
There's
maybe,
got to be Texas-uary. Yeah, it's got to sound goofy name like that.
yeah, yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Dave. Had a good conversation here, and we'll make sure we'll share everything in the description so people can get all your links and help
Thank you.
support the Breakwater Festival.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. This is a fun conversation.
Thank you. All right.
Yeah. Take care, man.